Welcome to this very special Write-On event hosted by the Writers Guild of Great Britain. I'm Emma Reeves, Chair of the Writers Guild. I'm also a writer. That's my actual job. And in the course of my work, I've adapted several books for stage and screen. As you know, an enormous amount of film and television drama is based on existing IP. Novels, memoirs, true life stories, other films and TV series, video games, board games, theme park rides, and of course, dolls. The task of the adapter varies widely from project to project. Sometimes this involves creating entire new plots and characters to create a long-running series, sometimes based on a rather short book. Sometimes the story and tone are so significantly altered that the source material is only recognizable by a couple of character names, if that. But at the other end of the scale is the faithful adaptation, which focuses on identifying the essence of the original work, finding those crucial elements that made it such a success, and reimagining those elements from another medium. The recent Netflix adaptation of One Day is one of those faithful adaptations of a much-loved novel. It's been a storming success, gained rave reviews, and is being watched again and again by viewers of many ages. It's really struck a chord with its audience, and I'm delighted to be here talking to two of the best writers in the business. David Nicholls is the author of the original novel, One Day. He worked as an actor and screenwriter before embarking on a highly successful career as a novelist. His other books include Starter for 10, The Understudy, Us, and Sweet Sorrow. He's created original shows for television, and he's also adapted other writers' work, including classics such as Far from the Madding Crowd, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and Patrick Melrose. So David was well qualified to adapt his own novel for screen, which he did in 2011 for a movie version starring Anne Hathaway. But for this new 14-part Netflix series, he decided to collaborate with a team of writers. As we love to celebrate writers here, I'll list them all in alphabetical order: Anna Jordan, Vinny Patel, and Bijan Shabani. But the lead writer, who is credited on 8 of the 14 episodes, is Nicole Taylor. Nicole is an acclaimed screenwriter. Her work includes multi-award-winning original dramas such as Three Girls, The Nest, The C Word, and Wild Rose. She's also written episodes of The Hour, The White Queen, Indian Summers, Secret Diary of a Call Girl, and many more. I'm delighted to get to chat with both of you. I've admired both of your work for a long time, and I'll ask you a few questions, and I'll also try to keep an eye on the chat so I can feed in audience questions. There's so much I want to ask about the process. So could we start at the beginning? David, having written the book and the movie, what persuaded you that it was time to tell this story again?
Well, it wasn't really up to me because I sold the rights. And so it had come up once or twice that it might have another life in another form. And my very good friend, Roanna Ben, who I've known for some time since I was an actor, she suggested that if there were to be a TV version, then it would be good for me to be involved and that might be part of their pitch. And so they approached Universal, who owned the rights. And, excuse me, and we also very quickly decided that I didn't want to do it myself, having spent so many years with these characters so long ago, and that we would build a creative team. So once the conversation with Universal had made it seem like a possibility, we approached Nicole to be the showrunner and to lead the writing side. So that was about it was exactly 4 years ago. It's been a very, very, very happy process for me, even though there was no obligation for me to be involved from a copyright point of view. It was I've managed to stay involved in all aspects of the production and the casting in the script editing, in the very much in the edit and things like music. So that's sort of how it's come to be. Really, I've been very, very lucky in that it hasn't been, often novelists feel slightly squeezed out of the process or excluded, especially if they're not writing the script. And when they do write the script, they're often seen as a kind of encumbrance because novelists tend to stay very, very loyal to their original material because the process of writing a novel is so epic and so so personal and so engaging. It's quite often quite hard for novelists to let go of things. But because I'd had quite a lot of experience as a screenwriter, because I was aware of the sacrifices you have to make sometimes to make a story work in another medium, I was very happy to remain involved with the process, and it's been a very, very happy process for me.
Brilliant. So what made you decide that you wouldn't be the sole writer this time? I know you touched on it. You said you spent a lot of time with characters. Was there something that you sort of wanted somebody else, another voice to collaborate with?
Yeah, I mean, almost as soon as you finish a book, it feels like a different person wrote it. You know, you immediately have to build a certain distance from it. And I started writing it in 2007, so a long, long time ago. And I felt that, you know, I loved the book, but there are definitely aspects of it that I would write differently now. You know, and it felt to me like it needed other eyes on it. I've said this before, but you know, it's a bit like being your own hairdresser. You know, you can't quite see around the back, and you don't necessarily make the right decisions. You tend to cling on to things that that aren't necessarily right. You know, for instance, the first chapter of the novel is just the bedroom scene, and you don't really find out what happens on the rest of that day until the very end of the novel. And that's a very specific structural idea that if I was writing the screenplay, I'd have found it very hard to let go of. I don't think I'd have been quite able to shake off that idea. And of course, it's crazy to hold on to that structure. Nicole and the writers saw obviously that you need to establish the premise, and you have to show the scale of the show, and you have to show the whole of that first day for the audience to get what the show is. And also there were things that I could never quite crack, even when I wrote the film screenplay. You know, why are we showing this one particular day? How do you let the viewer know that it's the same day every year? Do you just use captions? Is that enough? Do you need to put it into the dialogue? All of those dilemmas were things that I'd wrestled with and not necessarily succeeded in solving. So part of me was very happy to pass those problems on to someone else and let them unpick them, because you know, I'd already had a go and I couldn't do it.
I mean, it's very interesting that it's the first. Am I right in saying the first 12 episodes each is one day, a day per episode, and then episodes 13 and 14 have more day, and it's sort of obviously it does very closely. You do really get that this is a stylistic choice, particularly strongly as in the novel, which you know is obviously less clear in the film for obvious reasons. Nicole, how were you and David brought together? Were you match made by your representation, or did you already know each other?
Well, I've got one piece of nepotism in my entire career, which is Roanna Ben, who David has already mentioned, is also from Glasgow. So there's quite a sort of small town vibe going on. So whenever I went to the doctors, her late mother was the receptionist at the doctor's surgery. So I would always hear growing up about this amazing producer. Anyway, eventually, once I had a script in my 20s and I'd won this wee BBC competition, BBC Scotland competition, my script found its way to this famous Roanna Ben from Glasgow. So she gave me my very first job, but I haven't worked with her since, even though she's a close friend. So I got an email from her when I had a week-old baby. Sorry, David, I have to tell the week-old baby story again.
That's fine.
You did the adapting your own work is like being
I did.
So let me so anyway, so I wasn't looking for any work. I decided that I'd like built towards this year off that I wasn't going to look at anything work related. But when Roanna emailed me to say they were doing this, it just sort of reignited what I had felt reading the book all those years before. So I was sticking to the plan to turn everything down, but I just didn't want to have FOMO. So I just wanted to check that I decision. So I read the book to make sure. And of course, you know, I got even more out of it age 40 than I had age 29. So it was just simply unturned downable. So shout out for Drama Republic, who waited for a year before I was able to start. And that's this is a little sidebar, but in terms of how they treat women and who are mums, especially, like they're really very much they're very accommodating and helpful. So that's how I got involved. Yeah, so and also it was a real selling point to me that David was going to be involved, because apart from just loving the book, I really love his work as a screenwriter, and what he did with Patrick Melrose is, to my mind, like the best piece of TV adaptation ever. So, I mean, it was nerve-wracking, definitely, taking on this kind of beloved property. But also I felt like really excited about working with Roanna again, and also the chance to work with David too.
Oh, that's great, and it's great to hear about women and mothers of young children being treated well, because obviously that's something we fight for, and that doesn't always happen in the industry. So so once you two had got together, obviously you then decided. Did you ever consider it would just be you two, or did you always think we will need other writers in the room?
I mean, I would have been happy writing as many as possible, but it was just the time constraints. So to be honest, I didn't have any particular desire to like hire writing staff or anything. I'd never done that before. And it was just simply, it was necessary, but because of the timing. But then once we realized it was necessary, then it became very exciting about reading people's work and ultimately hiring people whose work I've loved for years. So that became like a very exciting part of the process, but it wasn't in my head initially, particularly.
And were you involved in the choosing of the other writers as well, David? Did you both work on that?
We did, yes, but then I stayed away. Actually, I kind of didn't go into the writers' room. I didn't really want to be a. I thought it would have been awful if they pitched an idea and I kind of frowned. I really left them to get on with it, and didn't really get involved until the script started to come in, and then just on a practical level, I gave notes on all the scripts, just as the other executives. I mean, I'm credited as an executive producer, but there was no special weight given to my notes, and they were free to discard my notes, and also I didn't give my notes directly, because I think again you kind of need to sort of slightly protect the ruthlessness, the necessity of making big decisions. You need to have the author a little bit distance from that. So all of my notes went through Jude and Roanna, the executive producers, rather than being delivered directly to Nicole and the other writers.
The amount of episodes is not necessarily the writer's choice. You kind of get told you've got this many episodes. Was 14 half hours? Was it a choice that you guys made, or was it sort of given to you by Netflix?
That was one of the best things about going with Netflix, because it was real carte blanche. It was have as many episodes as you want to tell the story, and further, you can be whatever length you want. So that was brilliant, because I didn't feel tied down to any particular story rhythms, which was important, because at the beginning I wouldn't have known how to tell the story in order to be able to say, yeah, I'll give you half an hour, I'll give you 45 minutes. It was so unclear. I'm for actually really quite a long time what the thing was. And there was more rewriting in this than pretty much anything I've ever done, although I am a big rewriter. But in terms of the writer's room, I mean, I'm not sure we really had a writer's room as such. We did, it was sort of post-pandemic. We didn't get together really, apart from met up for lunch. So there was lots of chat. It was really nice to chat with the four of us about the characters, and we were each coming from a different perspective, and that was very useful. And we talked, like, one of the, like, Vinny's a bit younger than me, Anna, and Beej, so we were trying to sound him out about what people of his generation would think about the book and the character. So it was very loose, and there was no like breaking story or anything. I don't actually have any experience of being in writers' rooms like that, apart from once in America, but I came up just where you get given an episode and then you go off and write that episode, and then you hand it into the script editor. So the writing room that exists nowadays in like British TV, we didn't do that, and I don't really have any experience of that. So people just went off and wrote their scripts, and then we would sort of rewrite them and go back to them, and it was super collaborative across the boards. And then David, I would say David's policy was just like gave me maximum freedom but maximum support. So I could just consult him anytime, basically, on and I would more and more through the process on anything from structural questions to needing to punch up a line, anything. So it was just a huge back and forth, really.
So if you didn't have a writer's room, was it up to you then? Were you working out how the episodes would be broken down, and then telling the other writers, okay, you've got 1995 or whatever.
Yeah,
How was
pretty
that
much.
decided? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there was lots of chat and we loved it when we were zooming away together. But I think the
Yes.
nature of the thing, I don't think it would suit a kind of traditional writer's room where you're beating things out. And I feel like something like this, which is so not plotty and so character driven, I can't imagine that being mediated through 4 or 5 minds in a room. I don't think that would have worked.
Yes.
So they would come up with their outline. So it was, you know, I didn't give them a beat sheet or anything for an episode, but they would have like 1995, this is kind of what's going on, or whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
Just to
So,
jump in. Sorry.
please
No, I
do.
was just going to say, I mean, the joy of this is that the form of Netflix sort of matches the form of a novel, in that, you know, when you and particularly this novel, the premise is that it's an ordinary day, and sometimes that day is a massive wedding or a trip to Paris, and sometimes that day is someone having an argument at home, or being by themselves, or babysitting or something. It's often, you know, some are big, some are small, and so and also a chapter has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a particular style, and a little hook at the end to take you into the next chapter, which is exactly what these episodes have as well. You know, when you adapt a book into a movie, then a chapter becomes a story beat. It becomes a little moment in this larger 3-act structure. But when you adapt a novel into this form, then you have a very, very close correspondence between the form of what a chapter does in a work of fiction and what an episode does in a larger story. You know, one of the appeals of writing the novel for me was that every chapter has a different style. Some are romantic comedies, some are much more dramatic, some are little fast, almost farcical comedies, some are more thoughtful and interior, and we could match that variety of styles as well as coming up with episode lengths that matched the nature of that particular story segment.
Yes, it really struck me watching it, how similar sort of structurally it felt to the novel, because and of course there are some things about the novel and the TV series which are sort of because of the format, which was, you know, we stuck to with great discipline, that it's quite unusual, because obviously because of the discipline of we're following it, everything happens on St. Swithin's Day every year after year after year, for anyone who's foolish enough to have not watched it, who's here today, and of course, so obviously major life events, things which if you were writing a traditional novel perhaps, or traditional drama, you would say, right, here's our, or a soap, right, here's our big moment with the deaths, weddings, births, you know, this will be the big moment. And of course, they don't neatly happen on a particular day. So you're often sort of catching up with that in retrospect. And obviously that came across very well in the series. Did you, obviously there is some incredibly juicy, dramatic moments which a soap writer would leap at, which obviously due to the discipline of the structure are not included. Did you ever get tempted to break your own rules and go, oh, well, let's just have a wedding, or let's have the proposal?
I lost my bottle occasionally and thought, what are you doing? You're not going to see them have sex. What are you doing? Like, are you so enamored of your format? Are you so sure this is going to work? Because if it doesn't, you're going to look such a dick for leaving out these major things. But then at other times, and I felt like that's not the dramatic point anyway. It's the aftermath of a drunken encounter that's the interest. So mainly I felt like, yeah, I'm going to stick to my guns. Occasionally I tried to like sneak. There's a wee glimpse of them in Paris. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil it. Occasionally I would like write some. I don't know. Basically, it felt the format. I felt confident in the format, and I love it as a viewer when you jump into things and you have to catch up and you're not told things and you're given things to wonder about. And I love that experience myself. So it was just about, to what degree are you being intriguing right now, and to what degree are you being confusing? And I lost my ability to judge that like very early on. So we did actually rely on other people a lot, didn't we? To, you know, outsiders to be like, oh, well, what, you know, if we've set up questions that we don't ever pay off, that's not that can't be defended as the unique format. That's just poor. So we had to like extra think about those things to make sure we were paying those things off. But otherwise, I love the jumping thing, and I never really missed the chance to do any flashbacks or anything. I just wasn't bothered about that.
Though I would say, it's a testament to the skill of Nicole and the team's screenwriting in that it could be a nightmare of exposition, this show. There could be all those scenes where people say, do you remember 3 weeks ago when you said, or, do you remember back in the summer when, and you never notice them. It's very seamlessly done. As a novelist, because you have access to an interior voice and then a narrative voice, it's very easy to say that it was 3 months since they fell into bed together or whatever. You can just state it. That's what a novel is. It's someone telling a story. And as soon as you put that in script form, then you have to sort of sneak it into the dialogue or the mise en scène or whatever, or you just kind of have to find other ways to introduce it without people noticing. And I think the screenwriters, Nicole, do that really, really well. There are moments when, that people say, do you remember when? And you don't, it just slips by and it's fine. And it doesn't ever clang out, I don't think. So that's really skillful screenwriting, I think.
Well, I thought it worked really well. I mean, in the novel and in the show, that the information was released very, very cleverly, so it felt like, oh my God, as you say, sort of when you learn that characters have slept together or whatever, it was.
Yeah.
It was great. Nicole, you mentioned that you were relying on other people to tell you you're on the right track. Who are those people? Can we ask?
I was really opaque there. I mean, I'm sure we're allowed to disclose this, but Netflix likes to test stuff, right?
Okay.
Which I'd never experienced before. But obviously, if you write films for big studios, then you have had that experience. But I haven't had that experience. So initially I was like, oh my goodness, what's this going to yield? But actually, it was really instructive because, for one, they all loved Emma straight away. And that was great. So I wouldn't ever have to have any notes about, oh, she needs to be more likable, which I get for every single project I do if there's a character in it. So the people loved Emma from the get-go. But also they did identify what confused them. They watched the first 3 episodes. So that was actually incredibly helpful because we realized, oh, there's just 1 or 2 little things that we set up that people do really need an answer to. So that was we just used it as a fresh eye. Can I say one more thing about the other writers? Because it was
yes.
on the goal that it's just my memory's being jogged a little bit now. But rather than just dish out episodes to them, in what was useful about that sort of writer's room-ish process is they were each sort of drawn to a particular character or to a particular subject. So that then determined what they were going to write. So Anna just had some amazing things to say about Dexter's mum, and she wrote a beautiful episode. Vinny's just a very funny guy, so he was going to do the date, in that episode with Ian. And Bijan, it's his first TV writing credit, which is unbelievable. He just did it so well, and he was just so kind of such a keen bean that he would have done anyone because he just kind of wanted to learn. But he had some of the best ideas, like for example getting Gary Nutkin, who's only briefly mentioned in the novel, to be a character in the episode. So they all in their way made a great contribution, but it wasn't a traditional writer's room as such.
Yes. And at what stage did you decide that, because David of course wrote episode 13, a very significant episode, was that always on the cards or did that happen at some point?
I mean, David, do you answer?
I don't know. I was sort of felt like I was sort of at the edge of the dance floor waiting to be asked for a dance, and then and then I got my dance. And it was a very difficult episode to write because it's the episode that's about domesticity and contentment. And actually reading the novel, there was nothing really, or not much, that we could use. Those chapters in the novel were written in response to editor's notes, and you can tell that they don't quite fit in the novel. There's a slight element of treading water, which you can just about get away with on the page. I think in the novel there's a section where they go on holiday to Yorkshire and go walking in Yorkshire, and he briefly meets the parents, which was a response to the note that the fact that we see a lot of Dexter's family but very little of Emma's, which was something that I had a reason for, but which wasn't quite making sense to the readers of the novel. And so I wrote those chapters, but they're not by no means the best chapters. They feel like a little addition to me. And then suddenly I was having to adapt those for the screen, and there was nothing there really. And so I was suddenly writing a lot of original material for characters who I'd created as a much younger man, and that was strange. I think, often when you do an adaptation, there's an element of impersonation, of taking on the voice and the style of a writer. And I've done that with, Edward St. Auburn and Thomas Hardy and Charles Dickens, and tried to blur the distinction so you can't tell when it's me and when it's them. But I've never done it with my younger self. And so to try and imagine Emma and Dexter again afresh was a challenge. And that episode was not easy to write, and I got a lot of notes, and it went through a lot of drafts. But I had the joy by then of writing with Ambika and Leo in mind, and pushing the script towards them, to their voices and their manners. And so even though it's all original, largely original material, I hope that it doesn't jar too much, doesn't feel like someone else is writing it.
Oh, not at all. But how does it feel, having obviously adapted lots of other writers' work and then adapting your own work? Did you sort of feel you were using the same tools or different tools?
It depends on the brief. When I adapted Shakespeare, I did a series called Shakespeare Retold for the BBC, and the brief there was, to have fun with it, to take the bare bones of Much Ado About Nothing, which is the great original romantic comedy, and try and make a modern screwball. Acknowledge the influence of Shakespeare on comedy, and then do something modern with which roughly follows the template of the story and has little quotes and references, but is pretty much an original screenplay. With Edward St. Auburn, with the Melrose books, the first three novels are a much more straightforward adaptation than the last two, which go into lots of different points of view and different time frames, and are very, very difficult to write. So the first three are pretty close to the novels, slightly reordered, using maybe 70% of Edward St. Auburn's amazing dialogue. But the last two episodes are much more free, because they have to be, because the novels are written in a radically different style to the first three, which read very much as a trilogy. So that's a different brief. With Far From the Madding Crowd, that's been adapted brilliantly and beautifully and famously. And so I want to be faithful to the novel, but I also want to be new. I want to draw out elements that haven't been fully explored in the wonderful John Schlesinger, Frederick Raphael version. So that one, you're kind of like, it's a different take. You're using the raw materials, but giving it a little twist, a little change in direction, emphasizing different elements of it. With Great Expectations, which I did a movie of, I think the problem there was being too faithful. It's my favorite novel, and I love it so much I couldn't bear to change a thing. And the film it's a classic example of something that's so faithful that it doesn't really tell you anything about the story. It's almost every line of dialogue is somewhere in the novel. It's pretty much a scene by scene copy of the novel's shape. And perversely, if you look at Sarah Phelps's adaptation, which she did around about the same time, which takes a lot more liberties with the story, it feels weirdly more faithful, despite moving further away from the bones and the mechanism of the original novel. So it varies from job to job. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I know what you mean. I think sometimes I've struggled in exactly the same way when I love a book too much.
Yeah.
Then of course, I'm guessing with your own work, people often have a sort of love-hate relationship with their own works. That must have been.
I mean, certainly when you finish adapting anything, you never want to read it again. The worst thing I could give Nicole as a thank you present is a first edition of One Day, because she'd throw it across the room. You spend so much time with this thing that you are kind of, well, I'm not going to be sitting down to read Great Expectations anytime soon, because you just become so overwhelmed by it. And it's sort of, for me, I listen to them over and over and over again until I pretty much know them off by heart. And once it's done, then you have a different relationship with them.
I mean, there's so much I want to ask you both, but I must get on to some audience questions before I turn it to Robert. So how do you select the writers for a project like this, particularly those without or with few TV credits?
I read a lot of people's work, and I was keen to. I'd seen Bijan's first play that he'd written, and I really just was so knocked out by it. And I felt like tonally he would just love the subject matter, love the book. He would just fit in perfectly. And I wanted a straight woman in the room. And so I was reading a lot of work by straight women, and I was reading a lot of new writers as well. So I would say, like I said, this is my first experience of like hiring people. So I would read and see what I knew Bijan for sure, because I knew his work well and I know him well. But I read a whole ton, but ultimately I wanted to hear what the execs thought as well, because Rowana, Jude, I've never done this before. So there was like somebody who was really inexperienced that I wanted to hire, and they were like, I don't think she's ready. I don't think she's going to be able to do it. And when we've got production deadlines, you're going to be stuck in a panic because you'll be rewriting it from scratch. So there were those kinds of considerations, but people with a range of life experiences and a range of levels of experience, and just people whose writing that I respond to and who I think would like the material.
Great, thank you. Sorry, David.
Just to jump in with, I mean, I'd known Nicole's work for ages, and I thought there was a kind of, particularly with Wild Rose, there was a kind of warmth and humor and energy and a lovely kind of a sort of mixture of comedy and dramatic stuff, and that was prime importance. And also, I'd known Nicole little and felt that we could collaborate, and I think it's very important that we were very, very, very keen to avoid any kind of tension, this kind of adversarial relationship that often comes up between the source material and the adaptation, by talking a lot, and that has proved to be the case. It's been the most collaborative thing, and I haven't felt at all defensive, and we've managed to critique and contribute in a way that's been that has jumped over all of those obstacles and has been very happy.
Great, thank you. Did your two main leads input into the writing at all?
Yeah, sometimes. David, do you want to answer this question?
Well, you've had more contact with them. I kind of kept a certain amount of distance, but certainly Ambika did, didn't she? And
definitely did, yeah. Ambika, just briefly, on episode 8, I think it is, it's the Emma alone episode where she's really at sort of a hinge, the hinge of her life, and it was I found it, Anna Jordan wrote it, but I was very obsessed with it because it's about whether someone starts writing, like, that moment where either you're going to do it, no one gives a shit, either you're going to do it or you're not going to do it, no one cares, and if you don't do it now, you're never going to do it. So I was kind of obsessed with it and kind of really wanted that episode to just be all about Emma. So it was hard, wasn't it? We all had a wee bash at it, and then we thought we'd got something good, and then Ambika read it and she was like, respectfully and not in a combative way at all, she was like, no, I don't think this is the way I don't think we learn enough about Emma in the way that you guys have done it. And we just had a chat on the phone, and then I felt really inspired to just produce another draft, which I suppose this always happens when I'm working with actors, when I get the chance to work with actors. They need so much less than one is inclined to give them at the beginning, and once you get that, you can just get rid of so much stuff, and then it just works better. So basically, Ambika was brilliant, and also she's very hilarious. So sometimes she'll just like have an idea for a line.
At what stage did you know who your leads were going to be? How far into the writing process?
I can't remember the answer to this, Nicole, because we must have had bare bone scripts for later episodes as well, but we were writing all the way through, or you were writing all the way through, weren't we? So certainly we had like very solid first and second block scripts when we cast, and a pretty strong sense of what the remainder was. But this was a long shoot, all those lovely July 15th scenes in Paris are shot in January, and there's snow on the ground, so it was a long time, and so there was a lot of rewriting all the way through, and we had a wonderful writer, Molly Goodfellow, contribute some additional dialogue even after shooting. So the writing is continuous, and I've never had that before because I've only ever been the solo writer on all of the projects I've done. I like to have everything pretty much tidied up before the first read through, but with this it was an ongoing process throughout because it was so huge.
as an author, you're fully in charge of every element of that universe you've created. With the TV show, I can already hear the soundtrack, see the locations, imagine the actors I'd love to cast. Obviously, I need to let the director and producer take charge of realizing it. Sometimes you can get very fixed pictures in your mind. And have you got any advice on that front? Or
Oh,
how to deal with letting things go and collaborating with other people's visions, I think, is
oh
the
yeah.
question.
I mean,
Did you choose a lot of the music, by the way?
I did, yes. I did, yeah. Matt Biffer is a wonderful music coordinator, so it was very much a kind of group effort. But the directors contributed some, and the editors, Mike, the editor on the first block, had lots of great ideas. And I'm slightly obsessive about music, and it's not an autobiographical novel, but I know what 1989 sounded like. I know that 1990 sounds like Soul to Soul, and and um and so I was, again, you have to find a way, a language to say, I like that, but can we try this? And to collaborate. And we managed to do that really successfully. And I contributed to the music, I suppose, also in the sense that I gave lots of music to Ambika and Leo to say, well, this is what Dexter would be listening to in 1995. So it was part of the actors prep, because you've got to remember they weren't born until Oasis had broken up. So for them it's very much a kind of, it's a research project to listen to what were people listening to in 95. But Matt did a brilliant job on the music coordination, and he was very patient with my contributions. And we particularly thought a lot about the fact that, in 1993 you're not listening to music from 1993. 1993 was Ibiza, so a lot of people were listening to soul from 1972. So you have to build in the same way that people don't wear clothes from the year in which they are living. People wear old clothes. And so you've got to do the same thing with music, and try and remember not just what was in the charts, but what was in the air. And we talked a lot about music, and I'm really pleased that people have responded to Matt's fantastic music coordination so well, because it was a big part of the process.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we all really love the musical journey as well as the emotional journey. It's fantastic. I must hand over to Rob. Thank you so much. I will be staying to hear more of your wisdom.
Hi, yeah. So I'm Robert Taylor. I'm a media lawyer and the Guild's legal advisor. And the sort of the way that I'm coming at this is basically as a lawyer looking at the contracting sort of situation. So David, you mentioned that you had sold the rights in the book to Universal, and so my question is how did that kind of was that something at that time you were aware of doing? Was that the sort of the deal that you had to sign? Was there any sort of choice that you had about losing control of those rights?
Yeah, I mean, this was pre-publication, so there was no sense that the book was how well or badly the book was going to do. It was the rights were sold by CAA, my American agents, and yeah, no, any involvement that I have with this show is purely voluntary. It was part of Drama Republic's pitch. Universal had no obligation to have me involved in any way, because when those deals are pretty tough. When you sell the film rights, you often are pressured into giving away the stage rights, the ongoing rights, all kinds of rights, and it's a tough negotiation. So I'm very grateful that I have been allowed to be involved. Excuse me. There's no contractual reason why I should creatively be involved, except perhaps that it's in everyone's interest to have the creator involved further along the line, not in a controlling way or a dogmatic way. I think I've tried to work collaboratively, and no one wants the original author sort of tapping you on the shoulder and saying you can't do that. So there's been a certain amount of very, very happy collaboration, and it's worked really well. But yeah, I have no. It's all gone. My hold over the material is completely gone, and it's just been part of. It's been thought creatively a good idea for me to be closely involved.
Yeah, yeah, and that's obviously the sort of thing that a lot of new writers face is basically having to do hard deals in order to get published or to get a pre-publication deal or whatever it is. And is it your experience that subsequently you've had more control over, you've been able to keep more control over your work?
Yes, I mean, I'd like to, because I was a screenwriter before I was a novelist. So in most instances, I'd want to at least start the adaptation process myself. Um, and because I'm not afraid of cutting stuff and changing stuff, that's always been the case. So I did the TV adaptation of Us, my fourth novel, um, and I wrote the screenplay of Start of a 10 and the original screenplay for this. And at other times, I think it's good to step away and to let other people have a go. So in tomorrow night, I'm excited to go and see the first night of the musical of Start of a 10, my first novel, but in musical form. And I've kind of completely ceded all creative involvement, except to have meetings with the creators and talk to them and meet the cast. But I have no power of veto. I can't suggest, I can't give notes. I can give notes, but I've chosen not to give notes. And that's been a nice way of working too. And it hasn't felt, because that's a much older work, I feel like that really was written by someone else. And I'm happy to have a new generation of creative people take on that story and incorporate their own take, their own voices. For me, actually, that's not any kind of theft or loss. That's exciting to see people who weren't nowhere near born in 1988 when the story takes place, but to see what they do with the material. It's fun, and I don't feel overly possessive, because my version of Start of a 10 now would be deathly. You know, it's an old story. The person who wrote that novel is long gone. So I'm really, really excited to see what someone else is doing with it.
Yeah, okay, that's great. That's really interesting. And can I ask Nicole, what was your sort of, in terms of like the contracting process for this project, how did that work for you? Was it something that was easy? Was it complicated? How did it pan out?
Can't remember anything specific that would be interesting to share. I suppose just writers we're usually paid by the defined length of whatever the thing's going to be, but we didn't know what the length was going to be. So I would say that was probably the most sort of unusual thing contractually.
Yeah. And I thought it was really interesting that you both mentioned you knew the producer or executive producer Rowena, and maybe you could say something about how important is that kind of trust element in a project. Because I mean, just sort of, so from my kind of legal perspective, I come across people all the time who've fallen out. I mean, that's a lawyer's kind of job, is to basically, deal with situations where people have fallen out very badly. And so I'm always interested in anything about how you can preserve that relationship, or what you need to preserve that trust and encourage it.
Well, I feel so passionate to reply to this question, because it's like the first thing if ever I am asked for advice by any starting out writers, I always tell them that this is the most important decision you're going to make ever, ever, ever in your career, apart from who your agent is. Because even now, if somebody's got the best material in the world, but I've never worked with them before and I don't know anything about them, I'm probably not going to do it. I've worked with the same people, the same 3 producers my entire career. And it changes everything, because in my experience, like, they've been able to get stuff out of me that I didn't even know I was capable of. So if you have if there's, like people say, if there's a stone in your shoe at the beginning, my God, it's going to hurt by the end. So if you do not feel good about this in any way, and I know when you're just starting out, when somebody takes interest in your work, you don't feel you're in a position to say no, but choose. I know when you're starting out, you feel like somebody else has got all the cards, but there's so many bloody producers in this country. And if somebody thinks your work is good, but you think they're a bit dodge, or you don't vibe with them, wherever it is, then just don't take the chance. But another thing is, it has to come from you as well. If you're going to behave all auteurishly and you don't understand how truly and don't accept how truly collaborative working in TV is, then that's not going to work either. But you can only give yourself over to that kind of collaboration if you really, really trust the people.
Yeah.
And this project could have been a nightmare if, not sucking up David, but if David was a different kind of person, if he was defended or egotistical, anything like that, or it could have been nightmare if I was all wanting to like using it as a jumping off point to do my own stuff. And do you know what I mean? So it's like truly interrogate who it is you're working with and how you feel about them, because you're just building up a nightmare, you know, if you don't feel good at the very beginning. And I feel like my career has been made by Sue Hogg just because I got on so well with her, Roanna Ben, Faye Ward, those three people. I would not have this career if it wasn't for them. So even if somebody dangles something in front of you, money, material, just you've got to have that feel good about them. Yeah.
That's great. I think that's really important advice for new writers in particular, because as you say, it is so easy to just think, okay, I've been offered something, I've got to grab it because this might be the only chance. And if the relationship isn't right and you don't have the trust, then as you say, it's not going to work out. If it feels bad at the start, after 4 years, it's going to be absolute, nervous breakdown time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Ran is my best friend, really, and I kind of, if we'd fallen out over this, it would have been disastrous. And similarly, she was very nervous that she might produce a version that I didn't like or didn't approve of, or that had gone in a different direction. And I've never felt that. We feel it's been very, very helpful and very, very very enjoyable. And part of that is me sometimes being told no. You're wrong. You did write the novel, but that doesn't mean you have a kind of veto or casting vote, a decisive vote that you're part of a team. And I think we have. It hasn't been entirely. It's been very stressful, as all productions are, but it's also been incredibly happy. And we've each of us chosen our battles well. I think that for me is a lot of what collaboration is. It's I when I look back at my previous work, I can see the things that I fought for tooth or nail, and I was completely wrong. And I've seen the other things that I've let go, and I have massive regrets about them still to this day. So it's choosing, maybe choosing those battles, choosing when to put your foot down and when to concede comes with experience. Maybe that's part of the process of growing up as a writer.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I think that's great. That's a great point. So, Emma, do you want to ask any other questions, or have we got any other questions from the audience?
Oh, there are quite a few. David, have you been tempted by reuniting with your characters to explore Dexter's next 20 years? And Ade adds, I'd love to continue the journey. Would you?
Oh, well, no, I think I don't know. I mean, sometimes when I've stumbled a little in my career, I've thought, oh, maybe it's time to think about that sequel, because whatever I write next, nothing is ever going to be as successful as Loved as One Day. So, but I think no, I think it's gone now. The novel I have coming out in April. There was a brief moment where I thought that one of when I was planning it, that the male character could be Dexter, and that it could be a sort of Marvel cinematic universe. And with Sweet Sorrow, my previous novel, I had a notion that maybe that was about 17-year-olds and youth theatre, and I thought maybe Emma could be in the company in some way, just because I loved writing her so much. And in both instances, I've decided not to do that and to let it stand, and there won't be a second series, and not with my involvement anyway. Universal might think differently, but I think it's rounded off now. In a way, I get to explore the ideas that you would explore in pursuing Dexter's story are ideas that I've been able to explore in other novels with different characters. So thematically, I do think of Us and as a kind of and the next novel, You Are Here, as a kind of emotional sequel without the need to resurrect Dexter or Emma. So for me, that for the moment, unless the next novel flops, the story is finished now.
Thank you. I think that's probably quite a good note to finish on with, David and Nicole. And thank you both so much.
Thank you.
It's honestly, it's been an absolute privilege talking to you.
So maybe we'll just jump straight in with some questions, and if I think I need to fill in any gaps, I can do that as we go along.
Brilliant, because yeah, I can see some great questions here. Robert, where is the boundary between a book that records information that's in the public domain and using it as one of many books as a resource about a public figure and adaptation? So yeah, when does research, if you're reading a book, when does research become adaptation of a particular book?
Well, that's going to really depend on how much of the original source material you take and put into your own work. So if it's just small amounts like quotations from a book or something like that, then that's probably going to be okay. But if you're actually taking, you know, a lot of material and a sort of the structure of a book, then that is probably not going to be okay, and you'll need to get permission for that to use that work, as long as it is actually covered by copyright. Yeah. So one of the things that to sort of to jump in things is that copyright will generally last for 70 years for the author's lifetime, and then 70 years after their death. So that means, like in the UK right now, anything published before 1953 is in the public domain. Anything published after that is probably not in the public domain, and you'd need to get permission to make an adaptation from it.
How do you mean? Because isn't it about when the author died as well? Isn't that a...
Sorry, yeah, sorry, yeah. So anything published by an author who died after 1953.
Yes,
yeah.
I just wanted to be absolutely clear.
Yeah, no, that's yeah.
So yeah, so the author needs to have died before 1953, otherwise the work is still in copyright. Thank you. We've got another question here. What are the legal implications of adapting a real life story or real events for screen, either adapting directly from a book or from information in the public domain? Although it seems to me like those would be two different cases.
Well, yeah. So the one of the interesting things is that no one has copyright or any rights over their life story. That's just, it's not something you can. The only way you can protect that is by confidentiality, because if no one knows about it. Other countries have laws covering that thing, but we don't have that in the UK. So that's kind of the first thing. So if it's just stuff that's already in the public domain about a famous person, then you can pretty much use that stuff. Again, if you're using it from a source like in a book, then if you take too much of that stuff, then it could be that you're infringing the rights of the author of that book.
Yes, and I think there's also, as you say, nobody has copyright over their own life story, but I think quite often legal advisors would be careful, would warn you to beware libel, wouldn't they? Because a few weeks ago I interviewed Gwyneth Hughes about Mr. Bates versus the Post Office.
Yeah,
she was saying that that they were very careful about what they could show of Paula Venel, and to the extent where they could only use things which could, everything she said had to be directly attributed to her.
Yeah.
So for instance, they found emails, but I think that's obviously because they thought that she was very likely to sue. So
well, yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. So for living people, the thing you have to be careful is libel, because if what you write about them affects their reputation, then it's potentially libelous, and you've got to show that either what you've written is true, which is obviously what they were going through with Gwyneth Hughes there, yeah, or that it's a genuine, honest opinion, yes, based on facts, basically, or is in the public domain, or it's for some, there's a good reason for it being in the public domain.
And is there an exception for, say, comedy or satire, like obvious satire? I'm thinking, for example, Channel 4's show The Windsors.
Yeah, so in the UK now we have exceptions to copyright that are called fair dealing, and one of those exceptions, it covers the use of copyright material for things like satire and caricature. And so that means that there is a legal defense to infringement of copyright for satire. So yeah, so sort of that's how. Although interestingly, that only came into British law in 2014.
Oh,
So
really?
despite the fact that the satire has got this really ancient history, this huge number of satirical books and plays and things, it wasn't actually a defence in UK law until 2014.
Wow, that's fascinating. So,
Yeah.
moving back to adaptation, we have a question here. What is the legal first steps if I want to adapt a novel?
So yeah, so good question. So again, the first thing would really be to find out what's the rights status of the work. Is it still covered by copyright? As I said, if the author died before 1953, then probably it isn't. But if otherwise, it probably is in copyright. And the thing to do if you think it is in copyright is to check with the publisher or even maybe with the author themselves if they are still alive. A lot of authors have got websites, or just find out what the situation is. Have they sold the rights? Do they still have the rights? If it's a book, the publisher may either have the rights themselves, or they may have the right to negotiate the film rights. So you'd need to think about to check with them. Basically, that's the first step, is to find out what the right situation is.
Thank you. Yes, because I mean, it's sort of, could be slightly depressing, but it's just a warning. I think before you start doing any work on an adaptation, find out about the rights issue, because an incredible amount of work is optioned. People think, why hasn't such and such a well-known book or series been optioned? 9.999 times out of 10, somebody at some point optioned the rights and is sort of squatting on them, or trying desperately to make something. But yes, it's sort of, unfortunately, the rights are often not available, and sometimes, as Robert said, even if the author would like them to be. I have a question here. Hi, I'm adapting my book into a screenplay right now, but I have people in it who are no longer with us. I changed the name of people I did not get permission from originally, but what about those who since died? I think that might be a two-part question, because I think there's a truism that you can't libel the dead. I don't know if that's true or not.
No, that's actually true. Yeah. You can't. Once you're dead, your reputation dies with you. So you can, once someone's dead, you can say what you like about them, which is why so many books appear about people who making scurrilous allegations about people who've just died.
So that part's fine, but the less good news might be, she says she's changed the name of people I did not get permission from. Changing a name might not necessarily be a defense against libel. What do you think, Robert?
No, because basically libel is about whether or not the person is recognizable, or whether a certain number of other people recognize the person. So just changing the name isn't necessarily enough because if you can identify them either by their physical appearance or their characteristics about how old they are, or what they've done, it's not gonna work. So I could write a book, say, about Boris Johnson, but if he's a sort of a big blundering guy who's gone to Eton and has a very sort of politically ambitious and all of that type of stuff, he's going to be recognizable from even if I call him sort of Maurice Micklewhite or something.
Yes, thank you. Are you able to pitch an adaptation to a company if you don't have the rights, in the hopes they'll buy the rights with you to develop the show? And Beth adds, my agent checked, no one has the right to this particular book yet.
I would not advise doing that, because I think that you could get yourself into a difficult professional situation where you'd pitched an idea and then couldn't get the rights to it. So I would try and contact the author and try and, see if you could get their agreement. In fact, one of the on the Guild resources page on our website, we have a little document called the right to pitch, which is intended as a pre-option type agreement, which basically all it does, it doesn't transfer any rights to anyone, but it just says that the screenwriter has the right to pitch this idea based on someone else's work to a producer. And there's no money involved in it. It's very simple. And I'd try and get the producer, or I'd try and get the author of the original book to sign something like that and see what happens.
That's brilliant, Robert. Oh, we've got some fascinating questions coming in here. I was working on a screen adaptation of an unpublished novel that my dad wrote before he died. Since he died without a will, do I need my stepmom to sign over the rights to move the project forward? And is there anything else I should consider?
Right, yeah. So the rights in the work will pass to whoever his heirs are under the intestate laws. And I am not a probate lawyer or anything like that, so I don't know. But my belief is that the estate will be will probably go to the entirely to the stepmom. To be honest, I don't know. I don't know that.
No, that's right. It does go entirely to my stepmom. So yeah,
right,
yeah,
right, yeah. So you'll need to get her permission through some kind of agreement to adapt the work just as you would if it was the original author.
Thank you. And another one here. Are there any considerations to be had about surviving family members' concerns if dramatizing the lives of their deceased relatives?
So if you're only dramatizing the deceased relatives, then there's probably not much that the surviving relatives can do about it. If it doesn't really affect them, then that's not really going to be a consideration. They may not like it, but I don't think that it would be. I think have been libel cases where people have tried to claim that something, terrible that a relative did may have kind of impinged on them, but I don't think those sort of cases have ever really succeeded.
Yeah. So they could make life, they could, go to the papers and complain about you, but they couldn't actually stop you.
Yeah.
We have a question here. I think we've answered this, but it's worth repeating. Do families of authors pick up rights to the work? I think the answer is yes for 70 years. Isn't that right, Robert?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So for 70 years after the author's death, whoever they've left the rights to in their will, or if intestate under the intestate laws, for 70 years. I approached an author's agent about a book and was told the rights had been sold, but I couldn't find out any more. Actually, this has happened to me, so I'm interested in, e.g. when the rights expire and where they were at. Is there a public directory of this information?
No, there's not really. One of the problems with copyright is that it's in the UK and for most of the world, it's not a registered right, as with say patents and other forms of IP are registered. However, the United States still maintains a copyright register, and to get a sort of full copyright protection in the USA, you need to register the work. So if it's a well-known work that's been widely published, it's worth checking the American Copyright Register, which is at the Library of Congress, and they've got an online database you can search. It is a bit clunky and difficult to use, but that's what I would do to sort of see if you could track down any rights that may still exist in the work, or to give you an indication of who may have owned them or whatever.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm an author and about to sign an option agreement with a TV production company for my series of novels. I own the copyright as I'm self-published. I'm looking for a TV agent and legal guidance. Am I able to get direct access to Robert's sage advice? I think you can, if you are a member of the guild, you are able to call our casework team, and they will refer any legal questions to Robert, and certainly we can vet contracts. So that's just one of the many benefits of membership. So we don't necessarily hook writers up with agents, but we certainly can give you contract advice. And another question, referring back to the idea that reputation dies with the person, what about the person who owns the people who own the deceased's estate? Can they come after you? I think we've kind of answered that, haven't we?
Yeah, if it's a question of libel, if it's about their reputation, then there's nothing they can do. Obviously, if you're using work that they've created, a book they've published or something like that, then the rights will remain in that work. So yeah, they in that situation they could. Then you'd need to get permission before you used it.
Yes, I think this writer is writing about the Duke of Wellington, which I think you're probably fairly safe to be fairly safe to be defamatory about him by
yeah, kind of, yeah.
Re Boris Johnson example. I am writing a political legal drama series. Is stating that the series is a fictional take on real life people and events enough protection?
Well, I doubt it. You know, if you want it to be you know, published or broadcast or whatever, then one of the things that will happen is in any agreement that you sign, the writer's agreement, there'll be clauses in there which are called warranties, and one of the warranties will be that you confirm that none of the material is liable or infringes copyright. And so if it does, and Boris Johnson comes after you, then the broadcaster or publisher will look to you for all of the legal fees they incur, and probably will, you know, terminate the contract and try and grab all the money back. So, you know, these things, you need to be careful about what you do. That, you know, there's freedom of speech, but you need to be careful about what you say about people and make sure that if it is a fictionalized account, then it kind of follows things that you can demonstrate are you know, based on some kind of fact. You know, so you could, so for instance, you know, you could say Boris Johnson was a bombastic politician, but if you said he was a murderer, you know, he's going to come after you for that.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert. I think I know your answer to this one. I've written a book and want to get it published. I've been offered a book deal, but they want £2,000 off me up front. What do you think, Robert?
No, no, you shouldn't. You know that vanity publishing is not a good idea. But there's a guide to self-publishing on the Guild's website. You're much better off these days trying to publish the book yourself. And I said there's plenty of resources and things, and you know you'll learn a new skill publishing it. So I wouldn't pay anyone to publish your work. And some of these publishing contracts can be really mean, because they will not only get your money, but they'll also take your rights as well. They'll say, well, we've got the rights to your book, as well as wanting your money for publishing it.
Thank you, Robert. I'm reading a selection of novels by the same author. I read, write, and create a scene. I'm writing a 2-minute commercial. From everything that has been said, it sounds as though I'm adapting chapters from the novel. Do I need to get permission for this work?
Well, yeah, I'd say you do. If you're using that much material, I would say that it's potentially an infringement of copyright. So you know, the safe thing to do is to get permission.
Unless, of course, the author's been dead for more than 70 years.
Yeah, if it's not in copyright, you don't need to worry about it.
Yeah. It says, what about rights held in trust? Is there specific language I should be using when making initial contact? Presumably that refers to when the estate of a deceased author approaching the heirs.
Well, yeah, so I don't think it really affects your initial approach. I mean, but the danger thing there is that if the rights have been kind of dispersed amongst a number of people, then getting them all to agree can be a very, very difficult process. And there's loads of cases of, quite famous authors who've died, and maybe the estate is now held by, say, 10 or 12 grandchildren or something, and getting them all to agree is, really difficult. In fact, I've got a case like this myself, where actually I'm representing the estate of a deceased author, whose father signed a film deal in the 1960s, and they've now got got another producer interested. The film was never made. But it's not really clear what happened to the rights. And the producer in the 60s is obviously, he's now dead, and he's got about 10 grandchildren. And I'm trying to negotiate with all of them to get them to agree to this deal, and it's like a nightmare.
Oh, thank you. A question here. Wasn't sure if I heard right, but is getting chain of rights or other initial questions answered a service available as a WGGB member? I mean, I would say getting questions answered is certainly a service. We might not necessarily know about a chain of rights because
No, we can't. We don't do.
keep records in this country.
No, the guild won't get involved in certifying a chain of title. That's not something we can do. I mean, we could advise you on how to go about it, but we can't actually do it for you. That's not something the guild can do, unfortunately.
But we can help with legal questions, and if if you have a contract, we could advise on contracts, if you're working with partners, or if you're or the adaptation contract. So yes, so we can do that. I think maybe time for one more question. I wrote a radio drama there was a parallel universe where Carol Vorderman was leading a political party that was up to all sorts of dodgy stuff. BBC Legal said that was fine because it wasn't our universe. So there we go.
Okay, well, that's good. It's good to
all right, final question.
I wonder if Carol Vorderman would agree.
I am writing a screenplay based within real life events, which I have based on my own primary research. There are several books on the subject, and I'm worried that someone will make a legal claim based on my work covering information found in their book. Do you have any advice on this?
So if you can show that you've done your own research, and obviously doing interviews with people is primary research, so that's a very good foundation. So if you can show you've got the records to show that, then I wouldn't worry unduly about other people saying, well, that was my idea. I mean, it's the same thing when you do any kind of work. There's the risk that someone's going to come up and say, well, that was my idea, or I invented that plot, or whatever it is. So you need to have good records of how you've developed your work. Yeah, I always recommend doing that. When you create multiple drafts of your work, save it in multiple places. So if you need to, you can show how it's developed.
I think that's really important for original work and adaptation. Just keep your records and the records of your research, just in case anyone does try to claim against you. Well, thank you ever so much, Robert. That was brilliant. And
no problem.
Thank you. And one final hard sell. You will have access to Robert's wisdom if you are a member of the guild, or if you want to join.
into
presumably a real life story that we don't know what the answer is, and for somebody to make up their own solution. see there are some great legal questions on the chat, Robert, but